In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB. This podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. You can check them out at funnybonebroth.com. JB, this is the defensive signings edition of the podcast. Last week, it was all offense. We signed so many guys, but they were on the offensive side of the ball. The offense looked great, but the cupboards were bare on defense, and the Argos answered the brief. They bring in guy after guy after guy this week, some that I'm really excited to talk about. So let's get right into it. JB, we got some defense.
We do. The Argos are turning over the roster like an abandoned garden in early spring.
Exciting defensive signings. Not really what either of us, I think, thought was going to happen. I thought it was going to be a lot of bringing our own guys back. You thought they were going to go young, and instead they brought in other people's old guys.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting in terms of trying to guess what their philosophy are, but it certainly seems like they have a type of player that they're looking for. And look, I'm all for, as I mentioned a long time ago in an article, I'm all for stripping it down to the studs. You know, I think one of the aspects of the CFL is that it is difficult to go young because you just don't, there just aren't that many available who are young. It's not like the NFL where you have this influx of young players all the time. You know, in the CFL, you know, when you're turning over your team, you still have to put together a team. So I think it's really a question of they didn't like what they had as opposed to trying to get younger.
And I say old, but I don't really mean that in a bad way. Like, sort of jokingly, I guess I do. You know, Charleston Hughes is getting up there, and everyone we signed is basically 31 or older, with a couple exceptions. But they're producing at a high level. When they last played football, numbers looked really good. And so I'm encouraged by this. I'm really excited about the D-line, and I think that there's some real possibility there in terms of defensive backs. We haven't really addressed linebacker, and that's something that we'll have to get to a little bit later on. But why don't we go through some of these defensive line signings to start? And, you know, right away, I think the biggest name coming in, we got to talk about Charleston Hughes, because that I think blew everybody away when the Argos signed him.
Yeah, I mean, looking at him, obviously at 37, you would think this signing might not make any sense. It seems more like a team that's one player away might add him as a situational pass rusher. But if you look at his statistics, they have not fallen off. Now, he did fall off in the second half of the season last season, you know, that the majority of his sacks were in the first 10 games. And so I think he will have to be situational. I don't think you're going to have him necessarily play 3 downs all the time. But, you know, his talent is still really good. I mean, I would say there's no reason to believe that he cannot give a productive year at the age of 37.
And the Charleston Hughes effect is very well known around the CFL, where whoever is playing opposite Charleston Hughes has huge numbers, and the tackles playing next to Charleston Hughes have huge numbers. Everywhere he's gone for his entire career, whoever he lines up next to ends up with huge contracts the next time their deal is up. So you want to be the guy lined up next to Charleston Hughes. And I think, like you said too, they have a backup plan, because they brought in 3 different ends this week, all 3 starting caliber, we think. Charleston Hughes is one. Cordero Law also signed, and Shane Ray, a linebacker in the NFL who's going to almost certainly end up being a defensive end in the CFL. So there are possibilities. You don't have to necessarily send Hughes out there for every snap, every down all season. You know, you can use him in clear passing situations to, you know, do what he does best, and then use Law and Ray as you see fit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes the most sense. I think having situational sub packages is the smartest way to play, and I don't see any reason why you wouldn't try and conserve the number of snaps that you have him running early in the season, and then maybe up that come playoffs if the team is doing well.
Were you a fan of the Cordero Law signing?
I was. Look, his stats are great. Again, there's no drop off. I mean, I think both those guys are purely financial. There is no statistical reason that their previous teams would not want to re-sign them. That they are performing at a high rate. They are leaders on those defenses. And I think those teams are just cutting salary pure and simple. And I think he's a huge get. I have no reason to believe he will not be, close to all-star level for the Argos, because he has, his statistics have been fantastically stable. And, I think he's going to be I think he's the best addition. I think he is the star of the offseason. I
think the interesting thing about signing Ray is that because you've got, I think in Charleston Hughes and Cordero Law, you've got some sure things. Ray is a little bit more of a lottery ticket, but he's a pretty exciting one, and he may end up being, the signing of the offseason, but he could turn into nothing special also. That's the thing, we don't really know, and that's the nature of lottery tickets, and I guess it's a bit of a gamble, but he's a pretty exciting prospect because his ceiling is so high potentially. This is a guy that was a first round pick, has won a Super Bowl, played with the Broncos, but he seemed to end up in trouble when he had a wrist injury, because that wrist injury led to him not being able to grab a hold of guys, not being able to, finish tackles the same way that he had previously been able to. And he's had multiple surgeries on that wrist, and that's sort of the concern now. Now, I had a chance to talk to, his last stop was in Baltimore with the Ravens, and I had a chance to talk to the guys at Locked On Ravens about what they thought of Shane Ray, like why he didn't catch on with Baltimore. What was the problem? Was it the wrist? And they say no. They say that his wrist actually looked fine, that it looked back to normal. But, I think they also acknowledge it's hard to tell, from the outside looking in, watching a guy in camp. So, maybe that was still a factor. But if it's not, if his wrist is healthy, then I think that's really exciting. And if it's not, at least now he's exclusively playing rush end, playing defensive end. You basically put his bad wrist, if it's a factor, on the inside. You put him in a position where he never has to use that to try and keep contain, and you just basically make use of his high motor. So I don't know. I think there's nothing but potential upside from Shane Ray, and then even if that fails, you've got Law, you've got Hughes. Man, it's exciting at defensive end. And then we got two guys brought in to beef up the middle in Drake Nevis and Kyrie Thornton. Drake Nevis, we were excited about last year. You think he's still got it as well?
Yeah, I think that, again, he hasn't aged out. He was a very effective nose tackle for the Grey Cup winning team. I think that he is a great asset. I think exactly as you say, Shane Ray it's smart. He's a lottery ticket he's not a load bearing wall. If Shane Ray can't do it, that's okay. Like, they are not counting on him to be a starter, whatever they may say in press conferences. I think you're looking at him. If he still has elite first step, then he is a fantastic pass rush situational guy. But if you're looking at the beef in the middle, I love the Nevis signing, and I love the Thornton signing.
Yeah, Thornton, we know a little bit less about. He was the third-round pick. I think he was drafted by Green Bay, spent some time in New England, spent some time in Detroit, and some real time, not just practice squad time. And he's a pretty big dude too. He's 6'3", 315. And so he's got that sort of Drake Nevis build, a little bit bigger than Nevis, but those two next to each other on the interior with the potential of Hughes and Law on the outside, and Shane Ray maybe coming off the bench to relieve Hughes. That's our starting defensive line. That's the defensive line right there.
I mean, There's a long list of teams that were put together in the offseason that didn't work. I think that the challenge is going to be you now have such a completely new team. Can you get everyone to buy in? Can you create a team from this collection of athletes? I think that's going to be a huge challenge for the defensive coordinator and a real test of his confidence in his scheme and his scheme. I think if he can get the players to buy in, because they're all coming from, different backgrounds and different schemes, and this worked for me here and that worked for me there. That's not going to be an easy defensive lineman room to run. So hats off to them for the challenge. I hope they're up for it.
And really, it's the same thing on the offensive side of the ball that we talked about last week. It's all these new faces. You refer to it as sort of being like a fantasy team where you're just kind of bringing in guys that don't actually play together. That's what it feels like here. It feels like an all-star team or something like that, where everyone's coming from a different place. But these are all really high caliber signings. I know that there's got to be a lot of nervous teams around the league, because really only Edmonton is spending money. It's just Toronto and Edmonton, and everyone else has been really quiet. And I think everyone's looking around as Toronto keeps bringing in guy after guy after guy, saying, well, how's Toronto continuing to do this? Now, one of the answers is because the salary cap doesn't matter right now. It doesn't come into play until we get to the start of the season. And so, Toronto can sign whoever they want right now and then see who pans out, which I think we talked about last week, but that's a huge luxury.
I mean, MLSE has shown itself to be a very smart organization. I mean, certainly, when they made those changes to the Raptors and the Leafs and TFC, that all ended up in championships and success. They seem to have still held to that path. I think it would be great, and it looked like MLSE in essence is going to give the Argos the payroll to get themselves straightened out and to head in a successful direction, because we probably have the deepest pockets in the league.
Oh, I don't think there's a probably.
Right. In terms of ownership, right?
Right.
So I think we were, it's nice to be, it looks like we're becoming part of the MLSE family, and that we're not the cousin who sleeps in the hut outside the house.
And the guys on the Argos Fancast were talking about how we should embrace the role of the villain that everyone already sees Toronto as. And yeah, I'm all for that. I think that's a great way to approach it, because everyone's already looking, especially this offseason. Everyone hates Toronto anyway. But now with this offseason, as we're bringing in everybody's favorite free agent and, the favorite player that was cut from the team or wasn't able to be brought back due to financial reasons, and now Toronto has picked up every single one of them, I don't think the Argos have ever been more hated. And so, like those guys said, run with it, embrace it, be the villains. That's fine. Let's take a look at some of these DBs they brought in, because I think there's a type here as well, like kind of we talked about with the defensive line signing. So first of all, we brought back Robert Woodson, defensive back, and he's one of the few guys that is going to still be on this roster from the last time the Argos played football. There just aren't that many guys, but Woodson is one of them, and he had some ups and downs. But we'll have a chance to see what Woodson can produce. But they also brought in 3 other defensive backs, all with very similar measurables. So we got Jamal Peters, Tristan Decoud, and Robertson Daniel. All DBs that are 6'1", 6'2", over 200 pounds. They all run like a 4.5, got long arms, and so that's sort of this type that they're going for too. I feel like Robertson Daniel's the one that we kind of have some CFL data on. And, with Calgary, he played a little bit of cover backer. I think that's probably what they're thinking. I've been holding out hope that we'd bring back Chris Aki and he would be the cover backer, and maybe Robertson Daniel could play halfback. But I'm starting to think that that's not in the Argos' plans, and they see Robertson Daniel as that cover backer. But you've got potential too with Decoud and Peters, guys that were corners in college. Peters was at Mississippi State, Decoud was at Oregon State, and they were drafted as corners, but they both struggled to fit in the NFL because they weren't, their cover skill wasn't quite there, their man coverage wasn't quite there as a cornerback. And in the NFL, there just aren't a lot of other options for a guy like that. Like if you can't play corner, then they've got to now teach you safety, and these guys just weren't quite the right size for safety, and that's why they may fit perfectly in the CFL, because these guys might be able to play halfback, they might be able to play cover backer. I don't know exactly where they see these guys going, but it's certainly interesting that they've basically all got the same measurables, and so I think you just sort of see what they can do and keep whoever's best.
Yeah, I think they've shored that up. As you mentioned, really the only area, and I have no reason to believe that they're not still out searching, is linebacker. It is, again, I think my concern is it is so different. Defense is such a system dependent aspect of football, that you have to be in a system and know it and be able to do it without thinking. And it's really hard even to incorporate one or two new guys, never mind 9. So, I think it's good to totally turn over the team. I'm really excited. It feels like maybe we're still a year away, where hopefully these guys can be the base of next year's team, from a defensive point of view, but I'm excited.
I don't think we're a year away. I think we're 4 or 5 games away, and I think that I'm excited about that. I have, with these new signings, because I was nervous about the defense last week. I felt great about the offense. I thought, the offense might be able to carry us into the playoffs, but the defense, it was non-existent. We just didn't have guys under contract. But after all these signings, I still, like you, I'm concerned about linebacker. Actually, I don't know if. I think we've probably got a cover backer on the team. I just don't know who it is. I'm not sure about the other 2 spots, though. I'm not 100% on that. I don't have the same faith in Bear Woods that a lot of others have. I think just because he hasn't played a ton of football. He's had injury issues, and he's starting to get up there. So I'm a little nervous about the linebacker spot, but I feel great about the guys we've got in the DB room. I just have no idea who goes where, other than I kind of like Shaq at boundary corner, and I kind of like Darby at free safety. And between everyone else, we've got guys that we can put places. So I'm not too worried about that. Defensive line I love, but yeah, let's see if we can shore up that linebacker spot.
I mean, Jack Cassar's got to be really excited at the moment.
Yeah, Jack is going to have a chance to prove himself. He's going to have a chance to be a starting player in the CFL. We know what he can do. We saw it at Carleton. We saw it firsthand ourselves, having had the opportunity to coach Jack. But he's a phenomenal player, and here is his window right now. Unless they go out today and knowing the Argos, they've already signed somebody since we started recording the podcast. So who knows? But yeah, there are a couple young guys like Jack who are going to potentially have opportunities to prove themselves. And I think it speaks very highly to the young linebackers they've got in the room already. The fact that they haven't gone out and signed a high-profile linebacker to this point. Guys that we're unfortunately having to say goodbye to, it looks like we talked about Chris Aki. They weren't able to bring him back in this past week. It doesn't mean they won't still, but usually once you get to the free agent date, and now anyone can sign with any team, it's rare that you end up coming back to the team that you left. It happens sometimes, but I'm worried that we're going to be saying goodbye to Chris Aki. I'm worried that we're going to be saying goodbye to Natea J, and that it pains me, but it's a business, and I get what they're doing. I wish they'd found a way to make it work with both those guys, but it seems unlikely at this point. I think that those guys are going to come back. And the other guy that we're potentially saying goodbye to is Michael O'Connor. What happens to him? We've only got one quarterback under contract right now. There was no deal reached with him. Does that mean they they don't have any interest in bringing him back? Does that mean, they're going to make another signing today? Does this mean Macbeth is going to come back? Who knows? But that's, I guess, another hole. We talked about linebacker potentially as a whole. Backup quarterback is a concern, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the interview that Dinwiddie had, he certainly seemed to express some interest in O'Connor. I don't. He came across as very personable, very likable, very free with his language. I would think that he'll probably become a little more familiar with coach speak as he gets a little more experience as the head coach. But he seemed to show some interest in O'Connor. I think it'd be great to keep him. I mean, he's a Canadian kid. I'm all for them trying to cultivate him as an athlete. I don't know what the holdup is there, but maybe it's just. I mean, I can't imagine they're arguing over money.
I think it's one of those things where I don't think the organization wants to make him a 2. I think the organization would love to make him a 3, but I think he probably wants to be a 2 because he wants a shot, because he believes he can play. He believes he can be a starter in the league. And I think the organization probably doesn't. They're never going to say that. And I couldn't tell. I was trying to read with the variety of interviews that Coach Dinwiddie has done now. I was trying to get a sense for, is he just saying this because he knows he has to say it? Like, he can't come out there and say, no, I don't want Michael O'Connor. Obviously he's not going to say that. But it seemed like he legitimately did want him in there. I'm just not sure the Argos see him as a 2. I think they probably look at him as a 3, as an emergency guy, as a guy that needs more time. And I think O'Connor, views himself as a 1 or a 2 and wants an opportunity where he's actually going to have a chance to play. Should the first guy go down, then he knows he'll be the next guy up. And I just don't think that situation is going to materialize in Toronto. I think they're going to bring in a proven 2. And I'm thinking more and more it's going to be McLeod Bethel-Thompson. And if Michael O'Connor wants to be the 3, I think they'll gladly have him back, or they'll, try their luck elsewhere.
I don't think they're going to bring back Macbeth. I think everything the Argos have shown is that they are, I don't say cleaning house, but they are changing the franchise. And I just think he's part of what the Argos were. I would be shocked if they brought him back. I think they're moving on, and I don't think they're going to have him as part of the team.
They may get a good deal on him because I just don't know where else he lands. Everyone else is pretty much sorted out with a 1 and a 2. And Macbeth, if he wants to play in the CFL, I think it's got to be Toronto.
I mean, they certainly have seemed to have been trolling the XFL. I think that they're clearly looking south for talent, which is great. I mean, you look at Taylor Heineke for Washington. I mean, who is he?
Right.
He was nobody. And, he started in the XFL, and then he came in and looked, lights out in that playoff game. And it wouldn't surprise me if they troll the XFL for a backup quarterback. They certainly seem to have, like I said, their eyes south for guys who had NFL experience. That would be my guess, is that they're looking through the XFL for a backup quarterback.
This is off topic, but I love the fact that Rivera had the guts to put him in as a starting quarterback, to let go of a high first round pick and put in this XFL quarterback who he clearly felt was better. But how many coaches would have had that kind of confidence in their ability to assess?
Poor Fields cannot be happy with yet another Ohio State quarterback washing out. And I know it's a weird statistical thing, and it's almost gambler's fallacy. Like, really, one shouldn't have anything to do with the other. But I think that he must have been just beyond terrible, Haskins. In the building,
he must have been, to let go of him this young, this early. With years left on his rookie contract, and this is a guy that was going to be the face of the franchise.
Yeah.
Let's see if we need to modify our predictions. So last week, I believe you said the Argos wouldn't win a game, and I had the Argos going to the East Final.
I believe my prediction was reasonable and well thought out, and yours was some sort of journey down fanboy fantasy land. That's actually how it went.
That does sound like me. So I think you had 8-10, and I believe I had 11-7, and I had us getting to the East Final. And I think you had us hoping to get the last playoff spot. So we've signed an all-star defense this week. What is your new prediction?
Well,
it's got to be better than 8-10.
Yeah, no, I think if you look at, it's clear that a number of teams are suffering under financial burden. And so it certainly looks like Ottawa and Montreal are going to be easily knocked over pins. I think that 10-8 is a very achievable goal for this Argos team. I think 10-8 is where I stand right now. And with this talent, that's where they should be, especially, to be honest, with the state of the league. You're not looking at 7 or 8 other powerful teams. The Argos should be able to rack up wins against Ottawa and Montreal, and then sprinkle in, a couple other.
I am going to up my prediction by 1, and I believe we're now looking at 12-6. I also, and this is a big step, I believe, and you get ready to laugh all you like, JB, I believe this team's going to the Grey Cup. I look at the defense that they added to an offense I was already excited about. And yes, things can go wrong. Yes, a lot can change. I love this roster right now. And even though we've got a couple holes that we pointed out, obviously they're going to sort out backup QB. That they're going to figure that out. Even if they don't figure out linebacker, or even if they don't add any more DBs, we can go to war with this group. And I feel very confident with it. And I just don't see a lot of other teams that scare me right now, with the lack of guys that are going back to their clubs and the lack of motivation there seems to be on behalf of most of the teams. I just don't know. I just don't know how many teams are going to be out there. I expect Hamilton to be good. I expect Edmonton to be good. I'm not sure about Calgary. They've been a sure thing for over a decade. And I don't know anymore. And so I look around the league and I see Toronto. And so that's my new prediction. 12-6. Argos are going to the Grey Cup. And take that, JB.
Yeah. I think it goes without saying that's incorrect. I think my primary concern is the coaching staff. I think that look, I like Dinwiddie as a guy, and he looks like he could be a great OC. Is he the head coach? A first-time head coach of a team that is being put together with no previous experience together is a very tall ask. And, I'm just looking at the history of professional football, and I think that this is going to be a really tough team to coach. And I'm concerned that this is going to be very difficult for him to pull off. I think that if they divide it and like he basically is the de facto OC and the defensive coordinator runs his side of the ball, which I've seen work, in professional football. I think that's great. What'll be crucial, I think, for the team is Dinwiddie an offensive genius? Guys will respect him, even the defensive guys, if he's a genius, meaning like he can scheme up. He is McVay. He is Shanahan. He is Sean Payton. That's the test for him, because as an inexperienced head coach, he's got to be able to show he knows his side of the ball better than most. And I think that's the real test for him. He can't just be okay, because he doesn't have the resume to be okay. He has to be a great offensive planner for this team to buy in with him as head coach.
And I share your concern. I think that that's a legitimate one. I like to think that this extra year that he's had is going to be extremely helpful, because it wasn't just that you're a first-year head coach, you've got a couple months, and then the season begins. He's had a year and a half to sort of digest this, to bring his staff together. They've been talking, obviously with some frequency as they went in planning for last year and now planning for this year. So I don't think he's quite in the same place as a first-year head coach. He's obviously not a veteran head coach either, but I don't think I have the same concerns as someone that was just hired, today in preparing for this season. And then the other thing that excites me is talking to offensive players, players that know him, that have had a chance to talk to him, that have talked to him over the last year. They're excited about him, and they do believe he's got something. They believe that he is that offensive genius that you talked about. And so if the players believe it and they are ready to buy into it now, then, I feel like I'm ready to buy into it too. Although I'm pretty ready to buy into anything pro Argos, but I feel good about it.
Yeah. Well, let's see how well it goes. And, Chris Jones is always hiding in the weeds. So as we kind of wrap up here, I think it's important. It's February, Black History Month, and for me and for you, and I think for the podcast, we really feel it's important to recognize the accomplishments of African Canadian, African American men and women, especially being fans of a sport that is has so many African American athletes in prominent roles. And for this podcast, the person I've chosen to look at is Willie Wood. And Willie Wood was the first African American coach in professional football. The CFL beat the NFL by 10 years. The CFL often has beaten the NFL in terms of hiring African Americans and having African Americans in positions such as quarterback throughout its history. But I think it's interesting to look at Willie Wood, because here was a 9-time All-Pro in the NFL. Obviously a superb athlete and a superb player. He knew he was a safety. He was a quarterback coming out of college. And back then, they simply wouldn't look at a black quarterback. And so if you were a black quarterback, teams drafted you and moved you to another position. So I think in that way, he's very representative of a time that was really sort of disgraceful in terms of how they looked at athletes. And so Willie Wood had this amazing NFL career. He came to Toronto. He was an assistant coach in 1979 and then became the head coach in 1980. And so some people might say, well, why would you choose Willie Wood, as he was fired 10 games into his 1 year of coaching with the Argos? But I think why it's important to recognize Willie Wood, first of all, of course, is that he broke that barrier, that he was the first African-American man hired to coach a professional football team. But I think the other aspect to look at is how he was treated after. And so, yes, in 1980, his team went 0-10 and was fired mid-season. But then he was never given another opportunity to be an assistant coach or a head coach. And I think that is really what needs to be looked at and talked about, is how often white coaches fail and are given more opportunities, endless opportunities, and the pressure that is put on African-American coaches to be successful. And if they fail, then they are never given a second opportunity, which is sort of the institutional racism of the football world. You look at Rod Marinelli, he went 0-16 with the Detroit Lions, and he was immediately hired by the Chicago Bears and is still coaching in the NFL, where Hugh Jackson went 0-16 and essentially was never given, or has not been given, a second opportunity. And so I think it's important to look at Willie Wood, both for his accomplishment and how unfairly he was treated after an unsuccessful season, because great coaches, Bill Belichick, went 6-10 in his first season and 5-11 in his last one with the Cleveland Browns. So, The Argos, who were 5-11 in '79, were not a good team and were not good under Willie Wood. But it really is unfortunate that he was so quickly dealt with, where so many white coaches are given so much more time and so many more opportunities.
That's really well said. And yeah, it's such a shame. Just looking back, he came into the most unfortunate situation because it wasn't a good team. And the odds of him succeeding that year were so slim. And he's following Forrest Gregg, who went on to coach the Cincinnati Bengals. He leaves. The Argos felt good enough about Willie Wood. Was a well-respected assistant coach, well enough to say, yeah, he's going to take the reins now. He's going to be the new head coach. And I completely believe. I think if Willie Wood is white, I think that he gets many other opportunities after that season. I'm not doubting. I'm not doubting that a white coach might not have been fired at 0-10. I think that's certainly possible. But I believe, like you said, that a white coach would have gotten another opportunity, and Willie Wood never did. And I think that's, like you said, extremely important to recognize, because while things, have started to change a little bit, you've cited some modern examples. So, we know that obviously there's a long way to go, because black coaches are definitely not given the same leeway that white coaches are. That is just about going to do it for us today. For JB, I'm Ben Grant, saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.